Only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. I guess it's morning on the West Coast. My name is Ken Brown, and I'd like to welcome everybody to this afternoon's webinar. We're going to focus on what's going on in the Congress in terms of alternative fuels, what the outlook is for this year, and then for those of you who are coming to the upcoming Energy Independence Summit in a couple weeks, we're going to talk about making sure you're prepared for Capitol Hill Day. Before we start, I'd like to give a special shout out and thank you to our many sponsors for this year's Energy Independence Summit. Without all of you, the event would not be possible. And for those organizations and companies out there that have not yet sponsored the upcoming summit and would like to, we'd be happy to include you as well. So thanks again to all of our sponsors. You're going to hear soon from our presenters. You're going to hear from Paul Kerkhoven, who many of you know, the Director of Government Affairs for NGV America, and also from Ben Evans, who's the Director of Public Affairs and Federal Communications for the National Biodiesel Board. And they're on Capitol Hill all the time and have their ears to the ground and experts on alternative fuels issues and what's going on here in Washington. Before we get going, for those of you who don't know, Transportation Energy Partners is a national independent nonprofit organization that provides policy support to the 90-plus Clean Cities coalitions around the country and their 14,000 stakeholders. We help keep coalitions and stakeholders informed of key policies, programs, and funding opportunities, and we also focus on educating decision makers, particularly those here in Washington with the federal agencies and in the Congress, about the importance of advancing markets for alternative fuels, vehicles, and infrastructure. Again, I think as most of you know, we have our Energy Independence Summit, which starts in 2 weeks on February 22nd through the 24th. Begins on the evening of Sunday, February 22nd, with an informal reception. It's going to be held at the Washington Court Hotel on New Jersey Avenue, right just a couple blocks from the Capitol. On Monday, we'll have a full day of program activities at the hotel, including some of the speakers listed below. We have Teresa McMillan, the acting administrator from the Federal Transit Administration, and retired Navy Rear Admiral Len Herring from California as keynote speakers. Still waiting to hear back from Secretary Moniz this afternoon, so hopefully he'll be joining us. And we have numerous industry leaders. We'll be having a roundtable session with the Environmental Protection Agency. We have a couple of Capitol Hill staffers who will be joining us, and we'll close out Monday evening with the Salute to Clean Cities reception sponsored by Cummins Westport. And then on Tuesday, we'll spend the day on Capitol Hill, where we'll divide up into about 25 to 30 teams by state and hold more than 200 meetings with various congressional offices. And we'll close out the day with a great reception that UPS hosts for us at their townhouse on Capitol Hill, a couple blocks from the Capitol. So it's going to be a great event. For those of you who are coming, we look forward to seeing you. We will have a more detailed agenda up on the website later this afternoon for everybody to look at. And for those of you who haven't signed up yet for the summit, there's still time. And especially if you're coming to town for the DOE strategic planning meeting on Wednesday the 25th, you should get in town a few days early and come to the Energy Independence Summit. Now we're going to get in today's program focused on the outlook for alternative fuels in the new Congress. Just a few words about the political climate and just the general environment that we're dealing with. I think, as everybody knows, gas prices are at the lowest point in probably 20 years. However, I've been reading just recently that there's a good chance they're going to start increasing soon, and I think there's no question that they remain very volatile, and that's another key impetus for pushing alternative fuels forward. While the economy continues to improve, there's still a critical need for job creation, and particularly for middle-class wage jobs. Despite the increase in production in our country, we still remain dependent on foreign oil and are impacted by what goes on in the world market. I think it's important to recognize that there remains a focus on budget deficits, and for programs that do see increases in funding, there's going to have to be strong bipartisan support. Paul's going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but the clean vehicle tax incentives are expired and not in place for calendar year 2015. And finally, I think, as everybody knows, as a result of the recent election, the new Congress now has Republican majorities in both the House and the Senate. In terms of Transportation Energy Partners' federal policy agenda for this year, it's got three major components. One is to extend the tax incentives for alternative fuels, vehicles, and infrastructure. Second is to increase federal funding for key alternative fuels programs. And third is to preserve the renewable fuel standard. And that's what we're going to talk about in more detail. First off, we're going to talk about tax incentives, and I'd like to turn it over to Paul Kerkhoven, who's with NGV America. Thanks for being with us, Paul. And for those of you who don't know Paul, he's had a long-time career on Capitol Hill, an expert on natural gas and other alternative vehicle issues, has great contacts and a reputation as a lobbyist in the Congress, and he's also a board member for Transportation Energy Partners. So take it away, Paul.
Thank you, Ken, and good afternoon and good morning, is it, and maybe for all of you. Okay, so at the end of, I'll go through some of these slides here, and we'll walk through some of the other issues, particularly at the end, what the president has proposed, etc. But anyway, in December, Congress extended the alternative fuel tax incentives for 2 weeks, and actually made it retroactive for all of 2014, and but now we don't have them. Historically, I think it's the last three, at least last two, including, well, last three Congresses, the credits have been extended retroactively, and that sort of leads me into the last bullet here, where TEP supports a 5-year extension. I think all businesses support a 5-year extension, or at least an extension of the credits, to provide some kind of certainty, and because having the credits, not having the credits in place is no way to run a business, and so I think okay, but let's go to the next slide, please. So this is a list of all the credits that have expired and that do not exist well, technically don't exist anymore, but could potentially be up for reauthorization. The excise tax credit for LNG, CNG, and propane. The IRS just recently came up with a ruling on how to collect the credits for 2014, and I'll get into that a little bit right now, is that pretty much everybody has to file a claim made using Form 8849, accompanied on Schedule 3. These are available on NGV America's website. We're updating it at the present time, but the forms are still there. And you can start filing as of today. It gives you your 50 cents back. It's important that if you're a public sector entity and you do sell natural gas or propane for that matter to the private sector, that you pay the highway taxes on that. So there's a form that you need to file with that, or you need to file first to do that. Now you may potentially be liable for some back taxes, etc. But I would suggest everybody work with your accountant and your tax advisor to go forward on this measure. Biodiesel credit expired as well, and Ben will talk a little bit about that, but that also is subject for renewal. All of these are subject for renewal, and in terms of Congress looking at these credits and whether they're going to renew them, you know, there's a lot of interest in some to save money and some to not extend these, and other ones to provide maybe some kind of a phase out. So how that works, how that's going to play out, I'm not quite certain. The middle one, the EPAC credit for the alternative fuel vehicles, has expired in 2010. There is some internal debate within NGV America to see if we can go for generate a new alternative fuel vehicle credit of some sort. We're very cognizant of the fact that getting new credits involved is it's going to be difficult, and a very, very, very difficult lift. Okay, Ken, next slide, please. All right, so now we get to the Senate and the House and the leadership, as Ken alluded to. Senator Orrin Hatch is now chair. Senator Orrin Hatch has been a big supporter of alternative fuel vehicles. I think his first alternative fuel vehicle bill was actually promoting electric vehicles. He's been a big supporter for NGVs. Senator Wyden, who is now the ranking member, also has expressed interest in alternative fuel vehicles, wind tax credits, etc. Congressman Ryan from Wisconsin took over as chair for Ways and Means. His view on these tax credits is really not as supportive as Senator Hatch is. The two members have talked a little bit already about tax reform and tax extenders and where to go and how they're going to handle all these issues, but nothing has been etched in stone. But we'll just have to see how some of these issues go forward. In that manner is, in going forward, there's an issue that is addressed by LNG and LPG. Both LNG and LPG have a disincentive or inequity in terms of the highway taxes that they pay when used in an alternative fuel vehicle. And for the LNG people, we call it the LNG tax disincentive. We're trying to have a level playing field. Senator Hatch this morning announced a hearing on Wednesday at 10 o'clock where he would address a variety of bipartisan tax issues, including correcting the LNG and the LPG tax disincentive. So this meeting is scheduled for 10 o'clock on Wednesday. I'm sure it'll be webcast for those of you that would like to monitor that. If you want to score, you can get on the website, or else you can shoot me an email. Then the president last week came up with some incentives, and I have a sheet here that I will quickly go through on what he did in terms of NGVs. For NGV, the president also proposes to fix the LNG tax disincentive. The President also proposes, like he did last year, a medium and heavy-duty vehicle tax credit of $25,000 to $40,000. $25,000 for the medium ones and $40,000 for the heavy-duty ones. And he also proposes an advanced technology vehicle tax credit. This is a modification of the plug-in electric drive motor vehicles and provided with a credit for new light-duty advanced technology vehicles. And an advanced technology vehicle is included, is defined as a vehicle that operates primarily on an alternative to petroleum. So that would again include the electric vehicles and natural gas ones, and I assume Ben, the 100% biodiesel ones. It's mostly light-duty one, credits capped at $10,000. The President also proposes a new, in the Department of Energy, a new super truck program, $40 million for R&D activities on alternative fuel engines and heavy-duty trucks. For clean cities, the President's budget proposes a $25 million increase to $49 million. It's pretty much the same as what happened last year. He again includes competitive financial assistance awards to promote investments in alternative fuel and advanced technology vehicle deployment activities. We'll have to listen to Dennis and Erlinda to find out what that means more of, but this is pretty much the same language they had last year. And I think Ken, for those Clean City coordinators that are on the call and that are going to be visiting, Ken's letter in terms of handoffs for the appropriators does address this. The President also proposes some research on natural gas vehicle storage systems and the diesel emission DERA numbers in 2015, FYI, fiscal year 2015, were $30 million, and the President proposes to cut that to $10 million for the 2016 year. I think, Ken, that's everything that I was going to talk about, and I'll be glad to answer any questions at the end of our presentations.
That's great. So, Paul, let me ask you one question before we go on to the next thing, which is, you know, looking into your crystal ball. I mean, it sounds like there's going to be a fair amount of discussion about tax reform, which would be opportunities to discuss all of these issues. And so my question is sort of twofold. One is, what's the likelihood of having some serious discussions about tax reform? And if that doesn't happen, what are the prospects for extending the existing incentives for 2015?
The thinking on tax reform is, I think many people are looking at 2017, but we'll have some significant discussions. There's a hearing tomorrow on finance by two former Senate finance members, Senator Packwood, who used to be chairman of the committee, and Senator Bradley, on what they had learned during tax reform. You know, last year there were a whole bunch of different suggestions on what to do with tax reform. This year, Mr. Ryan, he would probably like to do that, but we got to remember too that there are 21 Republicans up for re-election in 2016, and how is this going to play out? So that's, of course, is a concern, which will bring it back into tax extenders, which, you know, if the past is any history, we're looking at potential extension either at the end of 2015 or elimination thereof, or sometime in 2016. So, Ken, the answer to the question is, I guess it's difficult to determine. There is talk, but tax reform probably in 2017, and tax extenders will be addressed either this year or next year.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Paul. We're now going to move on to Ben Evans, who's with the National Biodiesel Board. And Ben's going to give us an update on the renewable fuel standard and anything else he wants to tell us about biodiesel and biofuels. So Ben, thanks very much for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Thanks for having me. And you know, it's a lot like a Groundhog Day with these tax incentives constantly coming in and out of effect, and the uncertainty that goes with that. And unfortunately, we have we're in very much the same boat with the renewable fuel standard, and a lot of uncertainty. We're now on our second year without a functioning renewable fuel standard policy in place. We don't have volumes set for 2014 or for 2015, much less 2016. So that's created a very difficult situation for all renewable fuels, and I would say particularly for the advanced biofuels, the newer fuels, and the younger, less mature fuels that are coming on board, like biodiesel and cellulosic ethanol. Stepping back, the EPA, as you'll recall, initially proposed across-the-board cuts to the RFS. That proposal formally came out in November of 2013, so about a year and a half ago. They have since backed away throughout the year after there was a significant backlash against that proposal. They have backed away from that proposal, and they didn't finalize it. And they seem to have, all last year gone out of their way to talk about how much the administration supports renewable fuels and wants to implement strong renewable fuels policy. They've suggested that they will be strengthening the proposal and that the volumes will go up. But to what extent, we really don't know. We don't know if it will be more of a cosmetic increase or something truly significant and meaningful. And as I said, at this point, the 2014 year is over. So in many ways, the 2014 volumes are significant only in that they will set precedent for the coming years. The latest from the EPA is that they hope to finalize a rule in the spring that would establish 2014, 2015, and 2016 volumes. That is somewhat ambitious. We are hopeful. We have heard similar things before last year, similar projections coming from EPA last year. So we're also wary, but at the same time, we know that that there has to be some resolution to this soon. It can't. I think everyone agrees and everyone understands that this is not a way to run a program, and it really can't go on much longer. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this just steps back, and I think I show this slide because I think it shows, it reminds folks how the RFS was structured and sort of what's at stake in this debate. If you recall, the RFS really went into effect in about 2009, 2008 years, the RFS2. And you have these two broad categories of the program. You have the conventional biofuels that have a 20% greenhouse gas reduction and advanced biofuels that have a 50% reduction. And really the first decade of the program was about building up that conventional pool. You had ethanol growing from 500 million gallons in 2009 all the way up to 15 billion gallons I'm sorry, not 500 million gallons. You had ethanol growing very quickly through the first decade of the program up to 15 billion gallons, and then the growth in that conventional section ends, and it just remains at that level of 15 billion gallons, whereas the real growth in the advanced pool didn't really kick in until a couple of years ago, and you start seeing big increases over the next up until 2022 with big increases in the advanced biofuel pool, and that and so that's really what is at stake in this debate. I think, I mean, of course, there's still some conventional growth left, about 1 billion gallons left in that pool, but there's a tremendous amount of growth that's left in the advanced biofuel pool. And I think a lot of the delays that we're seeing now have really hurt more the advanced side. I think they've hurt everyone, and everyone would agree that it's not good. It's a terrible way to run a program, but they've really hurt more the advanced folks. I know I can, just speaking for the biodiesel industry, we have dozens of members who have just been holding out. I mean, they've essentially dropped their production to minimal production, operating at, say, 10%, just so they don't have to completely close their doors. It just in the hopes that the market will come back, that the proposal will come out and it'll be strong and the market will come back. That, along with the what Paul just talked about in terms of the on and again, off again nature of the tax incentive and the unpredictability there, it's really created a very difficult couple of years for the biodiesel industry, or a year and a half or so, and for most renewable fuels, I think. It's been a very difficult time. I think next slide there, Ken, please. So I think just the one thing for folks who are coming out in a couple of weeks to do the advocacy day, I think the main ask that we have is just to urge lawmakers and to the extent that you have contact with administration folks to quickly finalize a strong RFS, a strong and predictable RFS that covers at least through 2016, so that the industry can get some stability back. I think we would argue that the RFS, you hear a lot of talk about lower gas prices, and I think some of the folks at API and other groups have said, why do we still need an RFS? Well, I think we would argue that the volatility you're seeing with gas prices is even more evidence that the RFS is needed. I mean, gas prices are down now, but I think we all know that they'll be back up at some point sooner or later. And it's that type of volatility that comes from a dependence on petroleum that is the problem. And that's what's dangerous, that our economy is so dependent on petroleum in the transportation sector. So our message is really the 3 E's. That's the one good way to remember it. Energy security, we're reducing our dependence on petroleum. The economy, economic growth, the industry is supporting hundreds of thousands of jobs across the country, and environmental improvements, reducing carbon emissions and other pollution. And I think we get, and some of you may get this as well, when you talk to congressional offices, you get a little pushback of, well, how long are we going to need these subsidies? How long are we going to need these programs? Why can't these folks stand on their own 2 feet? And I think, to me, the best answer to that is every energy industry in the history of this country has had some sort of policy support in the early going, and in many cases, mature industries now still have lots of policy support because I think smart leaders recognize that you need stability in the energy industry. It's such a critical part of our economy, and it's so important that we have a strong domestic production and capabilities, and so that it is important to have diverse supplies of energy that are and homegrown supplies of energy, so that we're not too dependent on any one source. And to pretend like we should get rid of all those policies and just to have then that will equal a level playing field is simply rewriting history. That's not how it's happened. That's not how the existing incumbent industries have come about, and it's not how any of the new technologies are going to grow and become strong either. So that's just one sort of messaging point I wanted to make. And Ken, I think that covers it all, and I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Ben. That's great. We're going to move on to funding priorities. And before we move on, I think we have a comment from Barry Carr from Landy Renzo and the Central New York Clean Cities Coalition, pointing out that in upstate New York, gas prices have gone up by 20 cents since Friday. And nobody up there believes that gas prices are going to stay where they're at. And then we also have a question, Ben. This is for you, Ben, from Philip Wiedmeyer in Alabama. The question is there still an effort on Capitol Hill for legislative reform of the renewable fuel standard, or has that lost a little bit of steam? I know that in the last couple of years, the petroleum industry has been pushing real hard for reform of the RFS, including weakening it substantially, if not eliminating it.
Right, yeah, thanks, Ken. And a lot of times, it's a good question. A lot of times people, when they talk about RFS reform, what they really mean is essentially is gutting the RFS or making it to where rendering it sort of meaningless. But yeah, I think those efforts are still underway. I think we will see a lot of hearings, a lot of discussion about the RFS and about the way it's been implemented and the way the EPA is overseeing the program. But I do think, the sort of curveball proposal that the administration put out a year and a half ago sort of put the reform stuff on hold. I think folks are waiting to see what the administration does and what they actually finalize, and then the momentum there may pick up. But we don't expect to see. It hasn't been a top item on any of the agenda lists that the leadership has put out, and we don't expect it. I think the RFS still has very broad bipartisan support, regionally diverse support, and at this point, we're not anticipating folks making a really strong run at trying to reform or eliminate it, but that could change at any time. So I think it's a good thing to keep in mind and a good thing to talk to people about, that this is a policy, it's a program that works. Once it's implemented correctly, it works. It's doing what it's supposed to do, and we just need to make sure we let it work.
Great. Thanks, Ben. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about funding priorities for fiscal year 2016. We're in the middle of fiscal year 2015, which ends in September, and the budget process has just begun for fiscal year 2016, which starts next October 1st. So we have three priorities that we're focusing on this year. One is more funding for the Clean Cities program, particularly funding for competitive grants, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. Second is to increase funding for the EPA clean diesel grants. As Paul mentioned, or at least to protect the funding that was there last year, as Paul mentioned, there was $30 million appropriated, which actually was a significant increase last year for the current year, fiscal year 2015, and the administration has only proposed $10 million for this year. Now, while that's not great, it is better than what they did last year. Last year they proposed zero, and actually the Republican House increased it to $30 million. So we have sort of an interesting situation. I'm not totally clear why the administration has not been pushing the clean diesel funding more as a higher priority, but I do think that the House again will look to increase that number during this year's process. And thirdly, we are pushing for a decent amount of funding for the Department of Agriculture's Rural Energy Assistance Program and the Bioenergy Program for Advanced Biofuels. So Paul mentioned some of these items, but here's a brief little chart which shows the administration's proposed budget for the Department of Energy, the Vehicle Technologies Program budget. They're actually pushing for quite an increase, from $280 million to over to $440 million as the top line, $444 million. So that's, as you can see, quite a significant increase. And if you go to the next page, here are some of the highlights. Paul talked about some of this. They're proposing $253 million for the EV Everywhere Grand Challenge to reduce the cost of plug-ins. Paul talked about the Super Truck 2 Research and Development Initiative, $40 million to improve the efficiency of long-haul trucks, $30 million for vehicle lightweighting R&D, $17 million for R&D to optimize powertrains, $10 million focused on natural gas onboard storage, and $22 million for a new vehicle technologies incubator designed to work on the real cutting-edge new technologies to help get them off the ground and into the pipeline. And finally, again, I think as people know, the Clean Cities program is the only program at Department of Energy that focuses actually on the demonstration and deployment of alternative fuel vehicles, and fuels and vehicles and infrastructure. And the administration is proposing $25 million increase for competitive grants for deployment. Here's the appropriations process, which is important to be aware of. The President announced his budget on February 2nd. Then the action turns to the various appropriations subcommittees. The key subcommittees for our purposes are the Energy and Water Subcommittee and the Interior and Environment Subcommittee. And essentially what happens is that these are the subcommittees that actually write the legislation, and there's a process by which any member of the Senate or House can make a request to indicate their funding priorities to the various subcommittees, and those requests will be due in March. You can see here the deadline for the House Energy and Water Subcommittee is March 18th. For the Interior and Environment Subcommittee, it's March 23rd, and the Senate has not yet determined its deadlines. They usually come a little bit after the House's, so my guess is they'll either be the second half of March or the beginning of April. Then the various appropriation subcommittees and the full appropriation committee will pass the legislation typically in May and June, be in action in May, finish in June, maybe early July, and then there will be House and Senate floor action middle, late summer, early fall, and then hopefully the final legislation will be done sometimes in the fall. I think as people know, recently it's been delayed usually till the end of the calendar year as they try and negotiate compromise solutions for the funding for the year. Here are the key subcommittee leaders. So if you happen to be from one of these states, you have great influence on this process, or the potential for great influence. But all these folks are important. The new people, the new chair of the Senate Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee, since it's now been taken over by the Republicans, is Lamar Alexander from Tennessee. Also on the Senate Interior Subcommittee, Lisa Murkowski from Alaska is now the chair of the subcommittee that funds the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Interior. Here is our proposed language that we are trying to get included in this year's appropriations legislation. We went for this last year. We actually were successful in getting something similar to this in the Senate bill, and we got some language in the House bill which talked about the Clean Cities program, but we didn't get any additional funding in the House bill. And at the end of the day, the language that was in the House bill prevailed, so we got mention of the Clean Cities program, which was important, but we didn't get the increased funding. And so this year we're going to push even harder for the increased funding. But here's our language. As you can see, it's focused on increasing funding from the program by $25 million for competitive grants to support innovative alternative fuel and vehicle deployment strategies with the focus on deployment. Our strategy, which we've just initiated, essentially what we need to do is for those coalitions that are from the areas of our subcommittee leaders, and that would be Tennessee and California in the Senate, and Idaho and Ohio in the House. What we're doing is working on getting stakeholder letters to these subcommittee leaders which will either go in next week or be handed to the congressional offices when we do our meetings during the Energy Independence Summit. We've already begun on the Idaho and Tennessee letters. They're already in the works, and we're going to start working with the California folks and Ohio folks on letters as well. Those are very important. And then we have prepared a sample letter which we're going to send to all of you, and encourage you all to get your stakeholders to sign on to a letter with you that would go to the senators and House members in your state. And essentially what those letters will do will be to ask your House and Senate members to request the Appropriations Subcommittee to include our proposed language. So this is a very important exercise. It was very effective last year. We're starting even earlier this year, and I think it'll be even more effective if as many of you participate as possible. And then we will, all of us will follow up with the various congressional offices, both on Capitol Hill Day during the Energy Independence Summit and beyond. So that's our strategy.
Paul,
Yeah, go ahead.
A little bit. Is
Yeah.
what you were talking about for those coordinators, this is probably, it's really, really important, and the earlier you get to reach out to them, the better, because these members are, at the present time, all putting their ideas together, and I've already started it with my NGV RD&D. I'm sure the biodiesel people are doing it. So get your letters out there earlier, the sooner the better, and get as many of your stakeholders signed on those letters. And Ken has done a phenomenal job in walking everybody through this. I strongly suggest everybody follow up.
Great. Thanks, Paul. So very briefly, just in terms of preparing for Capitol Hill Day, this may be obvious, but there are a lot of real benefits for participating in the education of your policymakers. It helps you build your organization. It helps advance our policies, and obviously building long-term relationships are very important for your organization. Again, relationships are everything when it comes to policy making, whether it's here in Washington, D.C. or at the state and local level around the country. So you should always be looking for ways to help build relationships with your elected officials and help them out, be a good source of ideas and information, provide opportunities for visibility and media coverage, introduce members of Congress to your key constituencies and community leaders. And it's also very important to build for your national representatives in the House and the Senate to build relationships at all levels, at their local offices, state offices, and here in Washington, D.C., because the different people who work for these offices and members of Congress all have different roles, and they can all be helpful to you. Again, it's important to realize that all politics is local. When you're doing this work, two things are really important. Focus on the value and benefits of the policies that we're advocating for your area, for your community. Show how clean vehicles and fuels are helping to create jobs and benefit your local area. And there's nothing like providing specific examples of local projects and programs in action, whether that's a fleet that or multiple fleets that you've helped acquire new vehicles that are on the road and saving money and saving petroleum and cutting greenhouse gases, or whether it's a new station that's been developed. Excuse me. And finally, particularly in the current climate, it's critical to demonstrate that our issues have broad-based and bipartisan support. And I think that is very true. We have people from all political persuasions and from the public sector and the private sector and businesses and community organizations and individuals, all who support alternative fuels, but it's important to demonstrate that and communicate that to your members of Congress. It's also really important to follow up and follow through with your members. If they ask you a question, if you don't know, don't pretend to know. Tell them you'll get back to them, find the answer and get back to them. It's important to send thank yous and follow-up notes, stay in touch between visits, invite your elected officials to local events, and elected officials are always looking to get media coverage, so if you have an opportunity to include an elected official in one of your media events, I highly recommend doing it. In terms of preparation for coming to your Capitol Hill Day meetings in Washington, each coalition should prepare a 1 to 2 pager which gives brief background on your organization and specifically examples of your local projects. We're going to send out a couple of examples of good ones from last year. I want to highlight Lori Lissick from Wisconsin, who put together a great map that shows her projects and stakeholders by congressional district. Extremely effective on 2 pages. Very good. We'll send those out to you. Visual displays are always helpful. Photos of stations or maps that show your projects. Anything like that is really good. Don't forget your business cards. When you're in your meetings, keep your phones on vibrate or silence so you're not disruptive of the meetings. And for those of you in Washington, you're going to be walking a lot, so please wear comfortable shoes. We've talked a lot about this in your meetings. Expect your meeting to last at least 15 minutes and no more than 30 minutes, so you really want to keep your presentation brief and leave time for questions and discussion. It's very helpful to have a specific request for action, and we will, one request for action, for example, will be to submit the Clean Cities appropriations request that we've been talking about. It's great if you can know your elected official's office, what their interests are, what committees they're on, any background about them. Know the opposition. There are pros and cons to every debate, and be prepared for questions you might get. Why is it the federal government's role to invest in deployment? We think it should only be research and development. All kinds of questions like that. And obviously be respectful, even if you're meeting with somebody who doesn't fully agree with you. You should respect their views, and you never know when you're going to have an opportunity to work together in the future. We will send this out too, but a basic meeting agenda in your time is to introduce your team and the overall message, provide a couple of brief examples of local projects in action, then make your requests, and then leave time for questions and follow-up. And finally, we will be, TEP is providing assistance. We're scheduling meetings for many of the coalitions. We are, for many of you, we are having stakeholders, identifying stakeholders to join you with your meetings who have an interest in your state or a presence in your state, and we found that the meetings are much more effective when the coalitions go in there with industry stakeholders and other organizations, and so that will be happening at Capitol Hill Day. We're preparing talking points and handouts which we'll send to you, and then also a sample local press release which you can send in advance or following your visit to Washington. So I think we'll stop there, and if anybody's got questions, you can type them in the little question box. I don't see any, or we've handled the ones that have been asked. We did hear from Ria that why are they cutting the DERA grants so significantly. Again, at least this year, the administration is asking for some funding for this program. And sometimes they do play budget games with programs that they know Congress will increase, and typically Congress has restored or increased funding for this program. But I'm not sure exactly why they are. But we will have Carl Simon, who's the director of the Climate Division for the Office of Transportation and Air Quality, at the summit, and there'll be a good chance to ask him that question. If anybody else has questions, Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, while you're waiting for some questions, there are two issues that I wanted to raise. Is that everybody should be, again, Ken gave you an overload on what's going on and what your requests are and what everybody's doing. But you should also know that many of your CMAQ funds are due for reauthorization the end of May. Congress is starting hearings on a new highway bill. This highway bill also includes a tax title, by the way. So some of these issues like taxes and highway taxes and funding for the CMAQ program may very well be asked, or at least you should be cognizant of that fact. Furthermore, on the appropriations letter, I'm pleased to announce or say that the EDTA, the biodiesel, and the ethanol folks, no, the propane folks and us will have a joint letter supporting a larger increased funding level for Clean Cities. Letter is in the works right now, so it's something you can hand out besides your own letter in support of that. So it's we've all agreed verbally to do that. Hopefully we can come up now, also agree with language. But I thought I'd let you sort of let that cat out of the bag a little bit right now.
Yeah, great, Paul, and we really appreciate that. Everybody does around the country. There's a question regarding the $25 million for deployment. What is the anticipated target use? That will really, the detailed target use will be determined by the Clean Cities program. When you're writing language like this, we thought it was most effective to, one, be important to be fuel neutral, and two, to give the program the flexibility to target the deployment, and that the most important thing was to have it focused on deployment of fuels and vehicles and infrastructure. So that remains to be seen. I will say that in the administration's request, which is slightly different than ours but along the same line, in their budget, they call for only up to 5 projects with their $25 million. So they're looking at 5 fairly sizable projects, which would require a 50% or a 1-to-1 match. So they're looking at, in the neighborhood of 5 $10 million projects. And I think generally in our discussions with the Appropriations Subcommittee, I think we'd like to see the money, the Clean Cities program, have the flexibility to do more grants at a smaller level so that more coalitions can benefit from it. There's another question here, which is, will the slides be posted? Yes, they will be on the Transportation Energy Partners website. Here's another question, Paul, maybe you can take this one, which is, hang on if I can find it. Why is there such a large discrepancy on individual state funding for alternative vehicles, since it seems to bring about strong results with strong incentives? You want to take a crack at that one, Paul or Ben?
Yeah, for the CMAQ money, 90% of it goes to California, Texas, and New York. But that is based on population and air quality numbers. But in terms of incentives, there's discrepancy amongst the states because a lot of states are taking, there are more incentives on the state level than there are on the federal level. And a lot of states have started that. California has been there. Oklahoma's got lots of them. Pennsylvania is coming up with all of them. So I think part of that answer is the effort by the states to try and promote these alternative fuels.
Yeah, and a lot of it depends also, wouldn't you say, Paul, on whether there are advocacy efforts within the states that are pushing for new changes?
Oh, very much so, very much so.
You know,
and Pennsylvania, beautiful case in point. You know, it's for, with all the natural gas coming out of the Marcellus Shale, you know, they're now setting up LNG and CNG stations along the Pennsylvania Turnpike. They have grants. They're doing research activities. And Oklahoma, the same thing. You know, it's Texas, same thing. All kinds of incentives. California has been pretty much there, but correct, Ken.
There's a question here. Our office has very strict guidelines regarding lobbying. How can we make our meetings effective without a specific ask? So for those, different coalitions are in different situations. And so for coalitions that have, you know, are not allowed to lobby for whatever reason or be involved in advocacy, you're certainly able to educate the members of Congress about your programs and projects at the local level. So it's extremely effective to, number one, educate them about what you're doing in your communities, the project you're involved in, and to let them know that those projects would not be possible without the Clean Cities program and without the partnership and, you know, with various funding agencies. And, you know, and as long as you're not asking for specific legislative language or specific legislation, you're fine in that respect. So that would be my recommendation, and that is still extremely effective. So I highly recommend everybody to at least be in there and talk about the great work that you're doing in your community and the importance and value of the partnership that you all have with various federal agencies, whether it's DOE, EPA, Agriculture, Department of Transportation, et cetera. Because the more folks in Washington understand how these programs work and the benefits that they're creating in their districts and their states, then the greater chance we have to strengthen the programs. Let's see. Trying to see if we have any other questions. I think that's it. Ben, have any comments or
No.
close?
Just thanks again for having me, and thanks everybody for participating.
Oh, we have one more question here. Do we think that money will be available for private fleets for propane conversions? The question, I think if we all join together and if we're able to increase this funding, get an additional $25 million, I do think that you know, coalitions will be able to apply for money, and some of it could be used for propane conversions. Absolutely. That's one of the important reasons for all of us to work together on this. So there was a question about that. I think all alternative fuels will be potentially available for eligible for deployment assistance. The funds will probably have to go through Clean Cities coalitions or other similar organizations. But yes, I do believe that that would be an eligible use of the funds that we're pushing for. Paul, any closing words?
No, I very much agree. I think you did a great job, and again, I thank everybody for attending, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We'll see you in Washington in a couple weeks. If you have any, let me just put up, here's our contact information. You can reach me or DJ Gross if you have questions or need more information about what we talked about today or about the upcoming summit. And we look forward to seeing everybody in Washington in 2 weeks. Thanks all. Have a great day.
Thanks again.